I would say that the media is now covering these protests more and more. And I think that's part because there's a lot of them and they're big. I think it's also maybe because the media is realizing that Trump is only getting less and less popular with each passing day in each new poll. This protest movement to the media, I think, seems like a tangible way to see and describe and report on that. In terms of other changes and evolutions in the anti-Trump movement, I would say for this weekend in particular, one other change we saw is that in a lot of places, people added food drives and clothing drives and other really practical efforts to build donations for food pantries and other local resources that have been hit so hard by Trump's cuts. And those food drives happened alongside the marches and rallies, which is really constructive. I would also say in general that we are, if you want a generalized perception of what's going on in terms of how this movement is changing, I would say we're seeing more protests in red states and in Republican areas of blue or purple states. I mean, that's my impression from looking at all the footage that I have looked at from this weekend's events. Here's some more. Here's Amarillo, Texas this weekend. Here's the big turnout they got in Atlanta, Georgia this weekend. Tons of people turned out in Atlanta. Really big turnout in Boise, Idaho. Boise again and again and again has been turning out huge numbers of people in Idaho. Here's Carson City, Nevada. Look how many people turned out in Carson City, including outside the state legislature building there. Carson City, of course, the capital. Thousands of people turned out to protest in Chicago once again. Chicago definitely showing up. Here's Clarksburg, West Virginia, outside the Harrison County Courthouse. Here's Cincinnati on the left side of your screen. Here's Columbus on the right side of your screen. Ohio has been turning out a lot of anti-Trump protests throughout this past 90 days. This weekend was no exception in Ohio. Here's Michigan. Here's Detroit on the left side of your screen and Grand Rapids on the right side of your screen. Michigan, like Ohio, has been turning out lots and lots of Trump protests with big crowds. This was Saturday in Detroit and in Grand Rapids. There was big crowd protesting in Denver this weekend, yet again. Denver, Colorado. Also Fargo, North Dakota turned up this weekend. People along the main drag there in Fargo. Concord, Massachusetts. They celebrated the 250th anniversary on Saturday of the first battle of the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The anti-tyranny, no kings theme dovetailed very well between the commemoration of the American Revolution and the many people who turned out there to protest against Trump at the same time. This was Rock Hill, South Carolina. The Easter Bunny says, hop away from fascism. No more rotten eggs in the White House. Here's a look at St. Paul, Minnesota, where they turned out just a look at this, very, very large crowd of people to protest against Trump this weekend. Again, in St. Paul. They keep doing this. And I could go on and on and on for a very long time with this. The first 50-51 protests, and again, 50-51 stands for 50 protests in 50 states on one day. The first one that they held was in February. It was mostly at state capitals. They actually had more than 50 protests that day, but less than 100. Now, in April, in the same month, we had one day with over 1,000 simultaneous protests, another one this weekend with over 900 simultaneous protests. I mean, some of these protests this month, we've seen tens of thousands of people, a few that topped 100,000 people. Sounds like the next one of these is not going to be on a Saturday. It's going to be on May Day, on Thursday, May 1st. We shall see. But again, I think in general, what we are seeing is that more of the media is figuring out that this is quite a thing. So I think the protests are really starting to bug them. I don't know if it's the number of protests or the number of people protesting or the fact that the protests really aren't going away and they keep seeming to grow. I don't know if it's the tenor and good humor and peaceful nature of the protest that's bugging them. But I think they are really getting bugged. I think it is really getting under their skin. And here's one way we can tell. Let's say you're the head of a big car company, and then something happens to your car company. And it's not happening to all car companies. It's not happening to the car sector, right? In fact, it's not happening to any other car company at all. It's only happening to your car company, and it's not good. And to add insult to injury, the CEO's favorite of all his vehicles, at least the one he really, really, really likes to talk about and show off as much as possible, that is turning out to itself be the biggest disaster of all. Quote, the Cybertruck, Tesla's newest vehicle, which consumed a lot of the company's resources while it was being developed, is looking increasingly like a flop. Sales of the Cybertruck in the first quarter were down about 50% from the last quarter of last year. And they weren't all that good in the last quarter of last year. So if you're the guy who's head of this particular car company, today's just a disastrous day, right? And why is this only happening to your company? I mean, it's not a mystery, right? The reason this disaster has befallen this particular car company, the reason this disaster has befallen your car company, the reason this is happening to you and no one else is specifically because of you. Tesla profit sinks, hurt by backlash over Elon Musk's political role. Tesla profits fall 71% amid backlash to Musk's role with the Trump administration. I mean, it's not a business world secret why this is happening. This is happening because of the guy who's the head of the car company. The company is repulsed by Elon Musk. The company is repulsed by what the New York Times gently describes tonight as, quote, Mr. Musk's support of far-right causes. The country really does appear to be just repulsed by President Donald Trump installing Musk, his top campaign donor, in a secretive, totally opaque, newly created pseudo-agency in which his job appears to be to destroy as much of the U.S. government as possible. I mean, what do we think of when we think of Elon Musk now? We think of every fired park ranger, every line of old people and disabled people that's out the door at a totally beleaguered and no longer functional Social Security office. We think of every cancer researcher whose study was defunded midstream. We think of everybody who you know who's about to be handed over to the tender ministrations of a collection agency because of their student loans. We think of every HIV and tuberculosis and severe malnutrition miracle treatment program that was working great and saving millions of lives, but that inexplicably was cut off with no warning because of Elon Musk. I mean, all of these things that have come to pass over these past 90 days. When we think about these things, when we're confronted with these headlines and with these disasters one after another, everybody thinks not just of President Donald Trump, but of his top campaign donor, who he has installed to do this stuff inside the U.S. government. And so, yeah, President Trump's top campaign donor, his car company just had a 71% plunge in profit year to year. And they were lucky to have that. So if you're Elon Musk today, on the day you get that kind of news, what are you focused on, right? What's top of mind? What are you today bringing up in conversation that nobody's asked you about? Turns out he's really bothered by those protests.
Now, the protests that you'll see out there, they're very organized. They're paid for. They're obviously not going to admit that the reason that they're protesting is because they're receiving fraudulent money, or that they're the recipients of wasteful largesse. But they're going to come up with some other reason. But that is the real reason for the protests. The actual reason is that those receiving the waste and fraud wish to continue receiving it. That is the real thing that's going on here, obviously.
In your mind, do you really think that, organically, naturally, everybody actually loves you and loves what you're doing? And that all of this is people who do, in their heart of hearts, actually love you and love what you're doing? It's just that they're all out there in the streets because they're being paid to pretend otherwise? You think all of these people are people who love you who are being paid to say they don't love you? Or, what did he say? These are people who are receiving fraudulent money. They're receiving the waste and fraud. Really? All of these people? Really? This was about 300 people in Cloquet, Minnesota, yesterday, silently picketing outside the Cloquet Public Library yesterday evening as Republican Congressman Pete Stauber spoke inside. Were all of these people paid to be there? Or are all of these people in Cloquet, Minnesota, all lazy fraudsters who don't want to give up how rich they're getting off all the fraud money that they're taking from the government? Is that what these folks are doing there? Is that who these folks are? In a totally different part of that same state, 3.5 hours away in Austin, Minnesota, people yesterday protested to try to protect Social Security from Donald Trump and, yes, from Elon Musk.
People protested in Austin against potential Social Security cuts and Elon Musk's comments, calling the program a Ponzi scheme. The rally was in response to prior actions of the Trump administration.
He has a tendency to, shoot first and say, I'm sorry later. They make a lot of mistakes that they try to walk back later. They say that they didn't have access. DOJ has access to our data. I don't want them playing around with my Social Security number.
Attendees also expressed concerns about SSA staffing cuts impacting service. Jake Johnson, a Democratic candidate for Congress, attended and spoke to the crowd.
Even if it's not currently actively being cut as we speak, the very fact that people within our government are talking about it being a Ponzi scheme or something that wouldn't be an ironclad promise is incredibly troubling to a lot of folks.
Johnson stressed the importance of representation and addressing Social Security concerns.
We've got chainsaw-wielding billionaires who are actively taking apart vital pieces of our government. We can't wait until it's too late. We need to be proactive.
January 2025, 73 million people receive Social Security benefits. However, the SSA recently announced job cuts and office closures, leading to concerns about servicing. While Kasel believes Johnson's presence at the rally fueled unnecessary controversy, both parties agree on Social Security's importance.
It is a valid and needed benefit to our elderly population. I mean, once folks are retired and no longer working, a lot of folks rely on that.